The year is 793 AD. Europe is sleeping. The Franks under Charlemagne, the Byzantines in Constantinople, the great caliphates of the East, all watching each other with hungry eyes. Nobody is watching the north. Nobody thinks to look past the icy fjords and gray forests of Scandinavia, where the wind howls like a war horn and winters can kill a man without ever drawing a blade. But something is stirring in those cold lands. Something ancient, restless, and hungry. The Norse people, Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, have been building their world in isolation for generations. They are farmers and fishermen, yes. But they are also shipbuilders of unparalleled genius, navigators who read the stars like other men read books, and warriors raised on stories of Odin's hall where only the bravest are welcomed when they fall. Their world is governed by brutal logic. Land is scarce, winters are long, only the strong survive. The eldest son inherits the farm. Younger sons must carve their own fate from whatever the gods allow. Every spring, young men look toward the open sea and see not just water. They see silver, slaves, and glory. The longship is their greatest invention. Slim, flexible, terrifyingly fast. These vessels cross the open North Sea and also sail up shallow rivers deep into the heart of a continent. No other ship of the age can do both. With the longship, the Norse become ghosts. They appear without warning on coastlines that have never seen an invader, strike with overwhelming violence, and vanish before any defense is organized. England in 793 AD is a patchwork of small Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Northumbria in the north, Mercia in the Midlands, East Anglia in the east, Wessex in the south. These kingdoms fight each other constantly, but all share one thing: the Christian faith. The most sacred center of that faith in northern England is the monastery of Lindisfarne, a holy island off the Northumbrian coast. The monks believe themselves protected by God, by their isolation, by the simple logic that no sane force would attack a house of prayer. This belief is about to be shattered forever. On a June morning in 793 AD, longships appear from the north. Dark shapes on the horizon, then ships unlike anything ever seen before, with serpentine prows carved into dragon heads. Before anyone reacts, hulls ground on the beach and screaming warriors pour onto the island like a breaking wave. What follows is not a battle. It is a slaughter. The monks have no weapons, no walls, no training. Raiders kill some, enslave others, and tear the monastery apart with cold efficiency. Silver altar vessels, gold book bindings, sacred relics accumulated over a century, all taken. What cannot be carried is burned. The scholar Alcuin, writing from Charlemagne's court, captures the horror. Never before had such terror appeared in Britain from a pagan race. The church across Europe trembles. But what no one understands yet is that Lindisfarne is not an isolated act of piracy. It is the opening move in a 250-year campaign that will remake England from the ground up. The Vikings have discovered something extraordinary. England is rich, divided, and completely unprepared. The monasteries dotting its coastline are treasure houses with no guards. The kingdoms bleed each other dry instead of watching the sea. For the men of the north, this is not just a raiding ground. It is a kingdom waiting to be taken. For 70 years after Lindisfarne, the raids grow larger, more organized, more frequent. Winter camps appear on English soil. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms pay tribute, Danegeld, silver piled high to make the raiders leave. But paying Vikings to go away only tells other Vikings that England is a place where silver flows freely. Every payment is an invitation. Every year the wound grows deeper and the blood runs faster. Then in 865 AD the probing ends completely. What arrives on the shores of East Anglia in the autumn is not a raiding party. It is the Mysal heathen here, the Great Heathen Army, and it has not come to raid. It has come to conquer. Archaeological evidence suggests it numbered between 5,000 and 7,000 warriors, possibly more. But size alone does not explain its power. This is a professional force, seasoned, organized, supplied, and commanded by military minds that England has never encountered before. Those commanders are legendary. The army is led by the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, the most feared Viking who ever lived. Ragnar raided Paris, terrorized the coastlines of Europe, and met his end dying in a snake pit by order of King Aella of Northumbria. Now his sons have crossed the North Sea, not for silver, for blood. The most fearsome among them is Ivar the Boneless, a name wrapped in mystery. Some historians believe he suffered a physical condition. Others believe the name describes his fluid, unpredictable tactical genius. Whatever the truth, Ivar is a commander of devastating brilliance, and England is about to learn this the hard way. The army lands in East Anglia. The local king, wisely choosing survival over pride, provides horses. a gift that transforms the campaign entirely. Mounted Norse warriors can now strike deep inland before any defense organizes. In 866 AD, the army marches north to York, capital of Northumbria. The timing is perfect. The kingdom is split by civil war between two rival kings, Aella and Osbert, each more concerned with destroying the other than watching the horizon. The Vikings exploit this division with lethal precision. York falls on November 1st, All Saints' Day. The Romans built the walls that surround the city, but Roman walls cannot stop Norse determination. The garrison is overwhelmed, the city falls, and the most powerful kingdom in northern England is seized in a single night. When Aella and Osbert finally unite and attempt to retake York in 867 AD, they are destroyed. Both kings die. According to the sagas, Aella is subjected to the Blood Eagle, a ritualized execution of terrible ferocity, as direct vengeance for Ragnar's death. The message to England is carved in blood. The sons of Ragnar have come, and they intend to collect every debt. East Anglia falls next. King Edmund refuses to renounce his Christianity. He is captured, tied to a tree, used as an archery target, and beheaded. He will later be canonized as Saint Edmund, his martyrdom outlasting every Viking king who ordered it. By 870 AD, only Mercia and Wessex remain as serious powers. The Great Heathen Army moves against both. Mercia buckles. The Danes establish winter camps deeper and deeper into English territory, occupying the land, claiming it as their own. Then they turn toward the last kingdom standing, Wessex, and there for the first time they encounter a king who simply refuses to die. His name is Alfred, and he is not supposed to be king. The youngest of 5 brothers, a scholarly and frequently ill young man who spent time studying in Rome and seemed destined for the church rather than the battlefield. When the Great Heathen Army turns toward Wessex in 871 AD, his brother Ethelred holds the throne. But within months Ethelred is dead, possibly from wounds sustained in battle, and Alfred, 22 years old, inherits a kingdom under siege. The year 871 AD enters the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as the year of battles. Alfred and the Wessex forces fight the Danes 9 times in 12 months across the chalk downs and river valleys of southern England. Some battles go to the English, more go to the Danes. The Vikings seem to have unlimited reinforcements, fresh warriors arriving constantly from across the North Sea to replace every loss. Alfred pays Danegeld. The Vikings take his silver and return the following year with larger armies. The payments prove England can afford more. They always come back for more. For 6 years Alfred fights a desperate holding action, reorganizing his forces, building defenses, trying to hold the line. Then in January 878 AD, the Danish leader Guthrum executes a stroke of devastating audacity. He launches a surprise attack on Alfred's royal estate at Chippenham, in the dead of winter, while the court celebrates Christmas. The attack scatters everything. Alfred barely escapes with his life, fleeing into the night with a handful of followers while his kingdom collapses around him. What follows is Alfred's darkest hour, and the seed of his legend. With a tiny band of loyal men, he retreats into the Somerset marshes, to a place called Athelney, the Island of the Princes, a patch of dry ground surrounded by impenetrable wetlands. Here, the King of Wessex becomes a fugitive in his own kingdom. No army, no treasury, no court. By every reasonable measure, he has lost everything. It is here that England's most famous domestic legend takes root. Alfred, distracted by desperate thoughts, allowing a peasant woman's cakes to burn on the fire while he shelters in her home, and receiving her sharp scolding without revealing he is the king. The story captures something real about this moment. A man stripped of everything, forced to think his way back from nothing. And think he does. From Athelney he sends secret messengers across Wessex, calling on the loyalty of his nobles and the men of the FYRD, the militia of free men. He gathers intelligence. He plans. In May 878 AD, 5 months after fleeing into the marshes, Alfred emerges at the head of a new army drawn from Somerset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire. The men come because their king never stopped fighting. They meet Guthrum's force at Eddington in Wiltshire, in what becomes the most consequential battle in Anglo-Saxon history. Alfred uses the shield wall, a formation of interlocked shields that blunts the Viking advantage in individual combat, and refuses to let the line dissolve. The Wessex army holds, then advances. The Vikings break. Guthrum retreats to Chippenham and Alfred lays siege for 2 weeks until, starving and demoralized, the Danes surrender. The terms Alfred imposes are extraordinary, not slaughter but politics. Guthrum and his commanders must accept Christian baptism. Alfred stands as godfather. The warlord who drove Alfred into the marshes emerges from the baptismal waters with a new name, Athelstan. England will never be the same. The Treaty of Wedmore in 878 AD, followed by the formal Treaty of Alfred and Guthrum around 886 AD, draws a line across England that will define the country for generations. North and east of this boundary lies the Danelaw, a vast territory stretching from East Anglia through the Midlands to the great Viking city of York. Here Norse law governs, Norse language is spoken, and Norse customs shape daily life across a significant portion of English soil. The word itself, Dina Lagu Danish law, describes not a foreign occupation but a living society. The Danelaw is not a wasteland of burned villages and terrified survivors. It is a functioning world where Norse settlers farm newly cleared land, build towns, run markets, and create a hybrid culture blending Scandinavian and Anglo-Saxon elements in ways still visible today. Towns ending in by, the Norse word for farm or settlement Derby, Whitby, Grimsby, Rugby. Villages ending in thorp, secondary settlements Scunthorpe, Cleatharps. The landscape of northern England is signed in Norse, a permanent record written in place names that outlasted every king and every empire. The Norse language reshapes English at its deepest level. Words for the most basic aspects of life pour in from Old Norse: sky, window, egg, cake, knife, skin, birth, anger, husband, happy, ugly, wrong, dream, trust. The very pronoun they is Norse. Old English used a different form entirely, gradually replaced by the Scandinavian version as the two peoples mixed and communicated. When English people say they speak the grammar of Viking settlers who farmed the fields of eastern England 1,000 years ago. York, called Jorvik by its Norse rulers, becomes the capital of Viking England and one of the most remarkable cities in northern Europe. Archaeological excavations at Coppergate in the 1970s and 1980s revealed a city of extraordinary richness and sophistication. Craftsmen worked in amber, antler, leather, wood, and metal with impressive skill. Merchants traded with Dublin, and Dublin traded with Iceland, and the commercial chain stretched all the way to Constantinople and the markets of Baghdad. This was not a backwater under occupation. It was a thriving international city at the crossroads of the Norse world. Alfred the Great spends his final years building more than just walls. He establishes schools, commissions translations of Latin texts into English, and creates a network of fortified towns that serve as both military bases and commercial centers that will become the backbone of English urban life. He is the first ruler to call himself King of the Anglo-Saxons, a title that implicitly claims authority over all English people, including those living under Danish law. He dies in 899 AD, having transformed a nearly conquered kingdom into the foundation of a nation. His son Edward the Elder and his remarkable daughter Ethelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians, the first female military commander in English history, continue pushing north, reclaiming Danelaw territory piece by piece through a combination of strategic fortification and military pressure. By 920 AD, Edward stands on the River Ribble while Viking, Anglo-Saxon, and Celtic rulers alike acknowledge his supremacy. Feels like the Viking threat is finally over. It is not. It has only paused to gather strength. For nearly a century after Eddington, the descendants of Alfred hold the line. King Athelstan, Alfred's grandson, becomes the first true king of all England in 927 AD, his authority stretching from the Channel to the borders of Scotland. King Edgar the Peaceful reigns from 959 to 975 AD with such competence that his coronation ceremony at Bath in 973 AD establishes a ritual still used in modified form today. England is not just surviving, it is thriving, sophisticated, and increasingly unified. Then comes Ethelred and everything falls apart. History calls him Ethelred the Unready. The Old English word is unreid, badly counseled, a bitter pun on his own name, which means noble counsel. He inherits the throne in 978 AD after the murder of his older brother, a killing he may have known about and certainly benefited from. He is 14 years old, politically compromised before he even begins, and surrounded by advisors whose interests do not align with England's survival. The kingdom he inherits is about to face a storm unlike anything since the Great Heathen Army. In 980 AD, the raids resume, but these are not the disorganized warbands of the original Viking Age. These are organized forces from unified Scandinavian kingdoms: Denmark under Harald Bluetooth and his son Sweyn Forkbeard, Norway under the formidable Olaf Tryggvason. They strike Southampton, then Thanet, then Cheshire, then the Isle of Man, then Watchet, methodically probing every weakness in the English defenses with professional precision. Ethelred's response is to pay. In 991 AD, after a Viking force under Olaf Tryggvason defeats an English army at the Battle of Malden, a defeat immortalized in one of the greatest Old English poems, Ethelred pays 10,000 pounds of silver. In 994 AD, 16,000 pounds. In 1007 AD, 36,000 pounds. In 1012 AD, 48,000 pounds. The numbers escalate because each payment proves England can afford more, and every successful tribute collector becomes a recruiting advertisement for the next Viking expedition. Then in November 1002 AD, Ethelred orders the St. Brice's Day Massacre, a command to kill all Danes living in England, driven by paranoid fear that Danish settlers are acting as spies for the raiding forces. The massacre cannot be fully carried out across the vast Danelaw, but significant violence erupts across England. Among the dead is Gunhild, the sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, King of Denmark. Sweyn does not forget. He does not forgive. Sweyn Forkbeard is not just a raider. He is one of the most capable rulers in the Norse world, a king who unified Denmark, conquered Norway, and built a genuinely formidable state. Between 1003 and 1013 AD, he conducts a systematic campaign to break England entirely. He burns Exeter, Norwich, Thetford, Wilton, and Salisbury. He ravages the Midlands. He builds alliances with the Danelaw communities, who increasingly prefer Danish rule to Ethelred's chaos. By autumn 1013 AD, the north submits, then the Midlands, then the south. Ethelred flees to Normandy. On Christmas Day 1013 AD, Sweyn Forkbeard is acclaimed King of England. The Viking conquest, first attempted 150 years earlier, appears finally and completely achieved. Sweyn Forkbeard enjoys his conquest for exactly 5 weeks. In February 1014 AD, he dies suddenly at Gainsborough in Lincolnshire, cause unknown, possibly internal hemorrhage, possibly a fall. The Norse sagas prefer a more dramatic explanation. The ghost of Saint Edmund, the martyred East Anglian king killed by the Great Heathen Army in 869 AD, riding through Sweyn's camp on a pale horse and running him through with a spear. Whatever the truth, Sweyn is dead before he can consolidate anything, and the empire he sees dissolves overnight. His son Cnut, just 19 years old, inherits the army in England but not the Danish throne, which goes to his older brother. Ethelred returns from Normandy. Cnut is forced to retreat to Denmark, and in a gesture of calculated brutality that marks his youth, he leaves his English hostages behind on the Kentish shore, with their hands, ears, and noses cut off. He sails away. England exhales. But not for long. Cnut returns in September 1015 AD with 200 longships and perhaps 10,000 warriors, the largest Danish fleet assembled since the Great Heathen Army. Over the next year he wages one of the most relentless campaigns in English history against Edmund Ironside, the warrior son of the now-dead Ethelred and everything his father was not. Edmund is bold, decisive, beloved by his men, and utterly refuses to accept defeat. He fights Cnut 5 times in 1016 AD, losing 3 and winning 2, rallying fresh forces after every setback. The final confrontation comes at Essendon in Essex, October 1016 AD, the bloodiest battle on English soil since the Great Heathen Army's campaigns. Cnut wins, but the cost is enormous. Edmund escapes again. Exhausted and perhaps genuinely respecting each other as only soldiers who have fought to the edge of death can, the two kings agree to divide England between them. Cnut takes the north. Edmund keeps Wessex. Then 1 month later, Edmund Ironside dies. He is 23 years old. Cnut becomes king of all England. What follows surprises everyone. Cnut does not rule as a conqueror. He rules as an English king. He keeps Anglo-Saxon administrative structures intact, issues law codes in the English tradition, and explicitly ties himself to the legacy of Edgar the Peaceful. He marries Emma of Normandy, Ethelred's widow, a stroke of political genius that connects him to the previous dynasty and neutralizes rivals. He makes pilgrimage to Rome in 1027 AD, negotiating trade rights for English merchants and positioning himself as a guardian of the church. The famous story of Cnut commanding the tide to stop is almost always misunderstood. When the waves soak his feet despite his royal command, Cnut turns to his courtiers and says, "The power of kings is empty compared to that of God." It is not a story of arrogance. It is a demonstration of deliberate royal humility, a Viking king using the ocean to teach a theological lesson. By 1028 AD, Cnut has added Norway to his domain, ruling an empire stretching across the entire North Sea. He dies in November 1035 AD, approximately 40 years old, one of the most powerful rulers in European history. His empire dies with him, but his transformation of England endures. The decade after Cnut's death is brutal and chaotic. His sons, Harold Harefoot by his first Danish wife, Harthacnut by Emma of Normandy, fight over the inheritance with petty viciousness. Harold Harefoot seizes England and reigns until his death in 1040 AD. Harthacnut follows, remembered chiefly for taxing England into fury to pay for a Danish fleet he never needed, and for having Harold's corpse dug up and thrown into the Thames out of sheer spite. Harthacnut collapses dead at a wedding feast in 1042 AD, probably from a seizure, possibly from drink, possibly from poison. He is childless. The Danish royal line in England is extinct. The great earls of the realm look to restore the Anglo-Saxon dynasty. They invite Edward, son of Ethelred and Emma, raised in exile in Normandy, to take the throne. Edward the Confessor, as history will know him, is the last male of the House of Wessex, the dynasty Alfred the Great built. His return in 1042 AD feels like the natural order reasserting itself after decades of Viking rule. But England has been changed in ways that cannot be undone, and the great earldoms not established have grown powerful enough to dominate any king. Edward the Confessor is more interested in building Westminster Abbey than governing his turbulent kingdom. He has no children. In 1051 AD he apparently promises the succession to William, Duke of Normandy, his cousin through Emma, a man of Viking descent himself whose ancestor Rollo received Normandy from the Frankish king in 911 AD. The Normans have exchanged Norse language for French and longships for cavalry, but the blood of the North still runs through them. In January 1066 AD, Edward dies. Harold Godwin's son, the most powerful English earl, is immediately crowned. Two men immediately contest this: Harald Hardrada of Norway and William of Normandy. Harald Hardrada is the last of the great Norse sea kings, a man who fought as a mercenary in the Byzantine Varangian Guard, raided across the Mediterranean, and carved a kingdom in Norway through sheer force of will. He lands at the mouth of the Humber in September 1066 AD with 300 longships and approximately 9,000 warriors. He burns Scarborough, defeats a northern English army at Gate Fulford, and occupies York. It is the last great Viking invasion of England, and Harold Godwin's son, having spent all summer watching the south coast for William, must now march 185 miles north in 4 days. The armies meet at Stamford Bridge on September 25, 1066 AD. The Norse force is caught partly unarmed on a hot autumn day, a portion of its strength still back at the ships. Harold's army charges across the river. The Norse sagas record a single enormous Viking warrior holding the bridge alone against the entire English army until he is killed by a spearman who crawls beneath the planking and stabs up through the gaps. When the bridge finally falls, Harald Hardrada receives an arrow through the throat. The last great Viking king dies in a field east of York. His army is destroyed around him. 3 days later, the wind changes in the English Channel. William of Normandy's fleet sets sail for the south coast of England. The Viking Age is ending, but it will end not with silence, but with the thunder of hooves at Hastings. Harold Godwin's son receives news of William's landing while still celebrating at Stamford Bridge. He has just won the most decisive battle of the Viking Age, killed 2 kings, and destroyed the last great Norse invasion force. He is at the peak of his powers and his confidence. He marches south immediately rather than resting his exhausted army, perhaps fearing William will devastate his personal estates in Sussex, perhaps simply believing himself invincible after Stamford Bridge. It is a fatal miscalculation. The armies meet near Hastings on October 14, 1066 AD. William has perhaps 8,000 men, armored Norman cavalry, skilled archers, battle-hardened knights. Harold has roughly 7,000, elite Huscarls armed with the devastating two-handed Danish battle axe, a direct inheritance from the Viking world, and the FWRD, the militia of free Englishmen. Harold places his army on a ridge and forms the shield wall, the same formation Alfred the Great used to defeat the Danes at Edington nearly 2 centuries before. This time the shield wall will not hold. The battle lasts all day, extraordinary for medieval combat, and proof of how evenly matched the forces are. Norman cavalry charges the English line repeatedly and is repulsed. Then in the afternoon the right wing of the English line breaks formation, perhaps chasing retreating Normans in premature celebration, perhaps in a genuine collapse of discipline. William exploits the gap with devastating precision. The shield wall unravels. Harold Godwin's son falls. The famous Bayeux tapestry shows him struck by an arrow near the eye, and as darkness closes over the Sussex hillside, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England lies dead. The Norman conquest that follows is the most transformative event in English history. William is ruthless. The harrying of the north in 1069 AD devastates Yorkshire so completely that the Domesday Book, commissioned in 1086 AD, still records vast stretches of it as waste. But here is the great irony of 1066. The Normans who conquer England are themselves the most French-speaking descendants of the very Vikings who spent 2 centuries shaping it. William's ancestor Rollo was a Norse chieftain. The warrior culture, the administrative brilliance, the restless northern energy, all of it traces back to Scandinavia. The Viking legacy in England is not a historical footnote. It lives in the language, sky, window, egg, knife, they are, husband, happy, ugly, take, give, want, call. It lives in thousands of place names across northern England. It lives in the DNA of the English population, particularly in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire where Scandinavian ancestry is still measurably concentrated. It lives in legal traditions that fed into English common law, the Norse emphasis on community arbitration, individual rights, and the oath of free men before their peers. The Vikings did not simply raid England and fade away. They became England. They farmed its fields, named its towns, shaped its language, and when the final conquest came in 1066, it arrived wearing Norman armor but carrying Viking blood. From the first longships on the horizon at Lindisfarne in 793 AD to the last great Norse king falling at Stamford Bridge in 1066, the story of the Vikings in England is ultimately the story of how the most feared raiders in history became the foundations of a nation, one that still speaks their words, walks their roads, and lives in the towns they built more than 1,000 years ago.